In this presentation, we will look at identity politics in India. In the current era of identity politics, where the demand for recognition has almost become more important than that for redistribution, minorities no longer allow any kind of deliberate, discourteous act or disapproval to their group identity. This can be seen as a welcome change, a tribute to democracy's power to empower the excluded. And yet, many regard it as an unwelcomed change which may turn out to infringe upon their rights and privileges which have been long cherished. Let us look at how these contemporary realities, identity politics, and hybrid identities play an important role in India. In today's globalized scenario, religion and nationalism have indeed become the most effective tools for anyone to assert his or her identity and at the same time resort to the same religious identity in order to take recourse. In other words, both are linked to chosen traumas and chosen glories. Consider, for example, the Babri demolition incident and the Hindu-Muslim riots thereafter. The Muslim identity from that day has changed dramatically. On one hand, the Muslims see, or to be more precise, identify themselves as being oppressed, discriminated against, marginalized, etc. On the other hand, others or non-Muslims see or identify them, that is the Muslims, as being violent, fundamentalist, extremists, etc. This view about the Muslims has also been generalized world over, especially after the 9/11 attacks. The whole debate surrounding the issue of conversion also has lots to do with the politics of identity. The impact of other political factors, conversion from a particular religion to another, theoretically obliterates an individual's pre-conversion ascriptive identities. However, the converted individual is then put in a dilemma. He, although makes attempts to carry out the new identities, but at the same time is also led by his ascriptive identities, which he may or may not forget throughout his life. In such a case, they are never accepted again within their own faith and at the same time are always considered as outsiders by the converting religion. Although we have multiple identities, most of the time they are more of a subtle nature and get aroused only when they are invoked. Therefore, the limited resources lead to competition for political mobilization, thus invoking identities and sub-identities. In other words, under certain conditions, some identities become more vocal and assertive in demanding for privileges and denying the same to others. A lot is also spoken about the rise of social movements, which is driven by invoking certain identities. For example, Bernstein accounts for the relationship between social movements and organization around certain identities in a globalized context. Consider, for example, the various Dalit liberation movements whereby their marginalized identities are strongly invoked in order to get political recourse. In a country like India, political parties play an important role in expressing, constructing, and mobilizing religious political identities. It is this political organization that makes the fact of pluralism concrete for democratic purposes. But as we all know, religion and politics is a deadly combination. The offshoots of such a combination can have a devastating impact on the cultural plurality and diversity of India. Similarly, political parties that are formed on the basis of regional identities can prove to be equally dangerous. Parties like Shiv Sena of Maharashtra, Akali in Punjab, Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh are all illustrations of this kind. Recognition and affiliations to such identities can result in a very hostile attitude towards other regions and its people. We also have the phenomenon of caste, which is unique to Indian polity. Caste cuts across religions. Caste by itself is a very complex issue. Therefore, caste identities which are generated in course of one's life are also very complexly intertwined with other identities. We can examine the famous examples of Dalits converting to Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam. However, they are never practically able to forget their original caste identities, which are indeed time and again invoked by significant others. Caste therefore survives conversion. We also have political parties based on caste identities. The individual's caste identity becomes the major source of political participation. The Bahujan Samajwadi Party is an apt example of such caste party politics. A contemporary example is mention of the 2012 fight for the Chief Minister's post in Uttarakhand. The whole issue whether Vijay Bahuguna, a Brahmin, or Harish Rawat, a Rajput, will become the next CM of the state had taken strong caste overtones and was indeed painted as the Rajput versus Brahmin fight. It was reported that since the state's demography had changed and the Rajputs are today a clear majority, had indeed added to the group's sense of deprivation. The politics of scarcity has its own impact on the politics of caste identity. This can be seen in the form of competition among various caste groups to be designated as backward. If such backwardness is granted upon them, they then become entitled to various benefits that fall under protective discrimination. The recent turmoil in Jaipur, Rajasthan, where Gujar community demanded such a status, is an example of this aspect of identity politics. This can also be looked at from another perspective. When indigenous identities are attacked by encroaching foreign powers, there are strong attempts made by the former to maintain, preserve, and revitalize their identities. This is usually done by taking recourse to their old age customs, culture, and reviving their glorious past. People are time and again reminded of their belonging to this particular group and therefore should behave and act according to their long cherished identities. Any kind of deviance is not just not accepted but also publicly criticized and ridiculed. It is often held that conceptualizations like multiculturalism and secularism have a tendency of freezing group boundaries and creating homogeneous and monolithic religious categories. However, This is a mere overlooking that these conceptualizations do. It should therefore be clear that the various communities in India do not fall within any particular homogeneous categories with fixed, clear-cut boundaries that can define them. Obviously, there is a lot of overlapping within and between communities, and there are further marked differences in various cultural practices between regions, ethnic, linguistic, and caste groups. A lot of concerns about attitudes and policies towards the established minorities are governed by two contrasting ideological positions, one of which is, as we have already seen, multiculturalism, the view that these groups should maintain their heritage cultures as much as possible while establishing themselves in other cultures. The other is assimilation, the belief that cultural minorities should give up their so-called heritage cultures and take on the majority's way of life. Scholars drew the conclusion from their research that some members of ethnic minority groups are developing full biculturalism and bilingualism rather than choosing between heritage and adopted cultures. They resort to two cultural identities rather than relinquishing one for another. To summarize, one can say that tribal communities have suffered more than ever in the postmodern decades. As economic transformations took place and the world started becoming a global village, nations became development driven. As a result, the marginalized communities, such as the tribes, were systematically kept away from participating in the economic development as well as claiming its benefits. They were made unsuitable for the land on which they toiled for decades. This was in the name of development and progress. But the question remains, how inclusive is this development? While any development-related projects are intended for the entire population of that region, it is usually benefiting only a few sections of the society. Tribals and other backward marginalized peoples suffer in the name of development. In order to resolve such tensions, we do have some robust constitutional provisions intended to safeguard their rights, but again, its implementation remains a question mark. Within the context of culturally diverse and plural Indian society, one cannot deny the existence of hybrid identities. Multiple identities coexisting that often lead to conflict in identities form the background on which politics of identity thrive and flourish. In the Indian context, identities get fragmented on the caste, religion, region, language, tribe, and class. The intersections of these identities and probable conflict of interests results in identity politics. It remains a huge unresolved task with our society to do away with such politics. I do hope you have a better understanding of identity politics in India. Thank you for watching the presentation.